Welcome to you all, wherever you are and whoever you are. I've not done one of these before, and I'm interested to see how it goes. I have a PowerPoint presentation, which I think Kirsty is going to bring up, and the first slide is kind of like an introductory slide. If we can go back to the first slide, Kirsty.
Yeah, here we go.
And perhaps, do we need, yeah, probably start there and play the show. Fine. I have to say, I had a wry smile on my face when an hour or so ago, I got an email telling me that the war on wildlife was starting at 1 o'clock today. I'm afraid the war on wildlife started centuries ago, whereas you're looking at Canadian seal cull, whaling, the war on elephants, you name it. It seems to me, though, if you put a price on an animal's head, if there's a benefit to humans, then pretty sooner or later there is a war on that animal. What we're here to talk about today, and I'm interested in the questions that you'll have, is a war which is going on because of a problem that exists in Scotland. And if we get the next slide, that problem is the management of shooting estates, particularly driven grouse moors in Scotland. If you've seen anything of the Revive campaign, then you'll know that there is a circle of destruction that surrounds grouse moors, which includes the killing of mountain hares, raptor persecution, the use of medicated grit, the uneven use of the land in Scotland. But the problem that we're looking at here today is the way that hundreds of thousands of animals are killed each year in Scotland so that there can be more grouse to shoot for entertainment. Now, I'm going to say that again because it stuns me, the idea that you would kill one animal to make sure there were more animals to shoot for entertainment. But in Scotland, there are hundreds of thousands of animals which are being killed each year legally so that there can be more grouse, so that some people come along and get some fun from shooting them. Perhaps we can have the next slide. And the victims are foxes, stoats and weasels. And these are the ones that we know about. There are other victims like crows where we don't have the kind of data and the details that I'm going to talk about in this presentation. But foxes, stoats and weasels are mercilessly pursued in some cases, trapped and snared to make sure that they don't damage red grouse, that they don't eat red grouse, that they don't eat their eggs or reduce the number of red grouse. Because the way that shooting estates value themselves is by the size of what they call the bag, the number of red grouse that are shot each year. Savills, the estate agent, reckoned that for every additional pair of grouse that are shot on an estate, the value of the estate can go up by £5,000. So you can see that they have an absolute vested interest in making sure there are as many grouse as possible. And that means that anything that threatens the grouse is gone. And we know that over the years, with great words like pests and vermin, they have made foxes, stoats and weasels seem to be animals which are non-entities, that it doesn't matter. You don't even need a license to kill these animals so that there can be more grouse. And it's not just that these are the victims, but as I go on to talk about some survey work we did, you'll see from the next slide that when you target foxes, stoats and weasels, you trap and snare other animals like thrushes, hedgehogs, dippers, and occasionally domestic animals like cats and dogs, which we have lots of instances of caught in snares. These are the, if you like, the collateral damage of this huge number of animals which are killed to reduce the number to increase rather the number of grouse to be killed for fun. And the next slide will show you some of the methods. And we've known about these methods for a long time, and we've documented them, and we know that they're cruel, inhuman, and primitive, and they're indiscriminate. That's why they catch other animals that are called non-target. The one on the left there is a box trap. Inside that device there is a spring trap. Animals are drawn to the darkness of the little hole and go in there and are killed. That one is supposed to have a mesh over it to restrict larger animals getting in. It doesn't have a mesh on it. The snare on the top right there is it's a Stone Age device, which was just been forever, and doesn't kill the fox it's aiming to detain, but it keeps it in that position legally for up to 24 hours. So imagine having a thin noose around your neck or some other part of your body for 24 hours in terror, and the relief is going to be someone coming along and shooting you. That's what a snare is about. And the rail trap on the bottom is another spring trap, which is placed very nicely on a piece of wood over a watercourse, which of course forms a bridge for animals to cross. And in the middle of that bridge is a trap, which can catch target species and non-target species. Now, as I say, we've known about the existence of these devices for many, many years. And together, One Kind and the League Against Cruel Sports in Scotland produced a report about these traps and snares and how they were inhumane, cruel, and indiscriminate. But the thing that we didn't know was how many of these things are actually out there in Scotland. So the League commissioned a survey, and out of that came 2 reports, which the next slide just quickly I'll show you the cover of those 2 reports. Hanged by the Feet Until Dead was a rigorous scientific analysis of a survey that we did of 7 estates, and Calculating Cruelty was a shorter summary of the main findings of Hanged by the Feet Until Dead. And the next slide will give you an idea of the size of the survey. It was the biggest ever detailed survey of shooting estates ever done. We concentrated on 7 estates, which ranged from being highly intensively managed for grouse, which there were 2 of those. At the bottom, there were 2 that were more or less not managed for grouse, and in between it was a variety working from one to the other. We asked an incredibly experienced surveyor who'd worked for over 30 years on shooting estates to walk all of the ground on the 7 estates over a 14-month period. And what we were asking him to do was to take a photograph and GPS, Global Position Satellite Position, of every trap and snare that he found, and together with some other things. But in terms of this report, we were concentrating on the traps and snares. And he took a photograph and a GPS recording of the position of everything he found. And what we got back was 7 gigabytes of data, which was all uploaded onto one central database. And that database was handed over to a recently retired professor who was the head of Department of Biology at Bristol University to work on an extrapolation of what we found on these 7 estates. And if you extrapolated that to the number of estates in Scotland. And on those 7 estates, remembering that 2 of them weren't managed for grouse shooting at all, we found over 2,500 killing devices. 2,500 killing devices on 7 estates. And the extrapolation the average extrapolation. And part of the problem with extrapolation was that nobody really knows the size of grouse moors in Scotland. It's somewhere between 800,000 hectares and 1.5 million hectares. Those are the estimates. And that's somewhere between 10 and 19% of Scotland is a grouse moor. 10 and 19%. So Professor Harris's extrapolations were based on how many would there be if it's 10% and how many would there be if it was 19%. And the figures that the League is using is the middle point between that. And that would be saying that there is about 1 million hectares of land in Scotland which is used as a shooting estate. And using that, I think we can fairly confidently say there are somewhere in the region of 50,000 killing devices set and active out in Scotland every day, because these devices are set and left. So they're there, and it just sort of, it's like having a minefield for animals. And when you look at the 57,000 traps and snares are there, you can also do calculations, if you're a professor of biology, about how many animals you think are killed each year. And again, there was a range, and that range depended on how big and how extensive grouse moors are in Scotland. And using the median point, the next slide, sort of frightens the life out of me. That would suggest that, and remember this is the midpoint, it's somewhere between 120 and 260,000 animals are killed each year, so there can be more grouse to shoot for sport. That horrifies me, that level of killing each year. Remembering that up until mountain hares were no longer open for shooting, there was a further 26,000 mountain hares being killed each year. And as I said at the beginning, we've no idea of how many crows are being killed each year, so that there can be more grouse to shoot for sport. But that's the level of the war on wildlife that we're talking about. And perhaps you get the idea now of why I talk about this as a war on wildlife, when so many animals are being killed for such a repugnant reason as to make sure that there are more grouse to shoot for entertainment. And I think the second to final slide is got a bit of fancy language on it. It says reframe the debate. When I first started working for the League, I looked at its campaign to ban snares and traps. I was going to think, oh, that's a bit weird. Traps and snares aren't a cruel sport, and the League Against Cruel Sports. And then when I started to think about it, I thought, oh, okay, I get it. The reason why we're wanting traps and snares to be banned is because they exist because of grouse shooting, and grouse shooting is a cruel sport, and that's why the League's involved. But in terms of the way that we talk about this, one of the reactions of the Game and Conservation Welfare Trust, great title, to our report was, oh, it doesn't matter because we've brought in some new traps which are more humane. New traps which are more humane. So their idea of it being better is that 190,000 animals get killed each year perhaps in a humane way. That's not the problem. The traps and snares aren't the problem. The traps and snares are just one of the symptoms of the problem. The problem is grouse moor management. The problem is this huge, intensive array of traps and snares and stink pits and medicated grit trays and killing of mountain hares and tracks and roads that go over the countryside, exclusion of local communities and the exclusion of economic development. That's the problem. And in this particular instance, the problem is there is a war on wildlife, and it's that war on wildlife that we need to say should end. You should never be able to kill an animal for the simple reason of increasing the number of another animal that can then be shot for sport. That's why I think we need to think about this war on wildlife, and the call for traps and snares to be banned is a part of that campaign to end the killing of animals, just so that more grouse can be shot for entertainment.